Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to APSS Book Selling University. This is how to record your own audiobooks, and our course is BSU 120. My name is Becky Parker Geist, and I'm going to be your instructor today. So welcome. Just a little bit about me. I am the owner of Pro Audio Voices. That is my audiobook production company, and we do audiobook production and marketing. I'm also the president of Bay Area Independent Publishers Association, as well as president of BNI Professional Connections. So I'm very dedicated to leadership in this world that we're in. I'd like to just jump right in and give you an overview of what we're going to cover today. We'll start off with preparation that we need to do as you look towards recording your own audiobook. What you'll need, some of your options in terms of the studio, and then regarding the book, preparing the manuscript so that you're really fully ready to go and you figured out what your best options are there. Then also recording, and some tips about how to do your best recording, and then the post-production, the editing piece, and how we can manage that, and just some things that I think will make the process easier for you as you go forward. And then, of course, the most exciting moment, which is the launch, getting it out there in the world. And I know everyone's headed in that direction, so let's jump right in. One of the first things, most valuable things you can do is to face your goals. Look at your goals, set some specific goals so that you know where you're going, and then you'll know if you've succeeded or when you've succeeded. So people have different goals regarding their audiobooks, and sometimes you may not have a goal in each of these areas, but I'm going to describe some of the kinds of goals that you might be looking at that fall within these different categories, just to open your thinking about what some possibilities are when you've developed an audiobook and you launch it. So financial goals, this is the one that a lot of people start off thinking about, and that usually is related to royalty income. How can I earn more money with the content that I've already created? This is an excellent goal area, and I would encourage you to think about what your goals are in terms of how much you would like to earn in royalties. But not everybody has that as a goal. For some people, for example, I have a client who is a financial advisor, and his primary goal was to get more financial advising clients. So he has written a book which helped not only to demonstrate his expertise, but also to provide value for his clients and others who are trying to navigate in the world of financial planning. Some of the things that we were able to do with his audiobook were to create podcasts of some of his tips. Also, we used some of the visual elements of his book to drive people to the website. And then he could also treat a lot of the content that was visual as bonus added value for his clients. So that's one way to look at some financial goals. That also covered some of the career goals, as, for example, the driving more people to his website so that he could expand his financial advising clientele. Okay, let me back up again to audience. When we're talking about audience, there are people who are audiobook enthusiasts. I mean, they're not looking to read a text. They don't actually want to pick up a print book or an e-book, or they just, maybe they're not able to read text anymore. There are a lot of people who are visually impaired and blind, and for them, audiobooks are really their only option. Well, when you move into having an audiobook, you have now expanded your audience into that arena, in many different arenas. So that's one example of an audience goal. Career goals, again, I mentioned the one about the financial planner, but there are others as well. For example, you may be someone who is a presenter, a speaker, and you'd like to expand your speaking career. An audiobook can help you achieve that. And then engagement. This is really about marketing. This is about reaching your audience in a different way, engaging with them in a different way. So you want to think about what are some of your goals in terms of your audience, your career, your engagement, your finances that you would like to be aiming toward as you prepare and go forward. All right, preparation. Some of the first things, and these are some questions that I often get asked, as you're preparing your audio or to record your audiobook, there are some numbers that you really would like to have in mind. For example, it's very helpful to know how long the book is going to take, how much time you need to schedule to create it, what you're going to be able to earn in terms of royalties. These kinds of questions can be answered with some preliminary preparation. The first thing is calculating what your reading rate would be. And that is literally using a stopwatch and your word count in your book. And I would say just start reading and hit the stopwatch at the same time. Go for 2 to 5 minutes. 5 minutes will give you a better, more realistic calculation. You can go for even longer and get an even more accurate calculation. So once you stop the time at, let's say 5 minutes, okay? So at 5 minutes, then you're gonna look at the section that you read, use your word program software to tell you how many words you just read. This is gonna give you your reading rate because you're gonna take that many words and you're gonna divide it by 5 to see how many words you read per minute. All right. Now you take that number, look at your entire word count for the book. And you're not going to count your page that has the copyright information. You're not going to count indexes, things like that. But an overall approximation is fine for this calculation that you're doing. So you're going to start with your book's word count. You're going to divide it by your words per minute reading rate. And that's going to tell you the approximate finished length of your audiobook, how many minutes it's going to be. This is an important piece of information to know early on, especially when you're recording your own audiobook, because it's going to help you understand how much time you need to schedule and how to prepare for the entire audiobook recording process. It will also give you a very close idea on how much you may be earning from each download of the audiobook once you have launched it. So EFL compared to EPL. This is what we're talking about is estimated finished length compared to estimated project length. The difference here is the finished length is, obviously when you're all done, the book is launched, it's going to be about that many minutes, right? The project length is how long is it going to take you to get that completed? And typically even for a professional audiobook narrator, probably about the best rate is going to be somewhere about 4 minutes for every 1 minute finished. So it's going to take at least 4 times. And that's with a professional narrator, someone who's actually very efficient in the studio. So if you're new to recording your own audiobook, you really should estimate about 10 times. And that may sound extreme, but it's not, because there are so many aspects to it. It's not just the recording we're talking about. It's all the editing that has to happen. It's going back and doing corrections. It's quite a long process. So don't worry about that, but give yourself that time, because if you think, oh, I should be able to get this short book done in 2 hours, you're being unrealistic, and you may find you get disappointed and discouraged, and I don't want that to happen. Okay, DIY versus DIWO. Most of us know what DIY is, do it yourself, and that's what we're talking about here in terms of creating an audiobook. But not necessarily entirely yourself, because DIWO is do it with others. This is where you can actually, you do your part. You do the recording part, and we'll cover more about that in a little bit. But the doing it with others is, for example, you may not be interested in editing your own audio. You may not want to learn those skills, which is fine. And you can actually hire different pieces of the process out and still record your own audiobook. So that will impact the amount of time it's going to take. So if you're recording your own audiobook and editing your own audiobook, if you're doing all of it DIY, give yourself 10 times your estimated finished length as your estimated project length. If you're doing it with others, you're going to dramatically cut down that amount of time. But still, I would say give yourself at least 6 to 8 times in terms of your thinking about how long the process will take. Okay, most of us know what MSRP is. That's our suggested retail price. And once you know what your estimated finished length is, you'll be able to make a guess at what it would sell for through Audible. Audible is the audiobook side of Amazon, and ACX is the production side of Audible. So we'll get more into more detail about that later. But on the acx.com website, you can see what the time frames are on finished books, and about that will give you a range of what they will charge as a retail price. You don't have an option with Audible. You can't set your own price. Again, we'll get it more into that later, but this will give you an idea of what your royalties will be. And your royalties with Audible, they're the biggest in the market, but I'm going to recommend that you don't go exclusive with them, even though they will tempt you with a 40% royalty rate. Their other royalty rate, if you don't go exclusive, is 25%. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But that will help you make some calculations about your costs and your expected income from some of your sources. Okay, let's jump into the studio part. Okay, you have some options here. You can go with a home studio, or you can go with a professional studio. And yes, there are some other options. You may know somebody with the studio who has a studio at home. We're going to classify that as home studio. The difference would be that you don't have to set it up yourself. Okay, so one of the most important things if you're about to set up a home studio is your location. Where are you going to place it within your environment? Now, that is most likely at your home, so I'm going to treat it in that way. If you have it in some other location, the same kinds of criteria are going to play out. One of the most important things is considering external sounds. If you're near a highway and you can hear, if you stop to really listen and you can hear a lot of road noise, that is not a good location for your booth. Because even though you're going to do some bit of soundproofing, it's very expensive to try to get to the place where you're really, truly locking out all of that sound. So be realistic and think about the other kinds of external sounds. Are you near a playground? Do you have a noisy dog next door? Are you near a refrigerator or a HVAC system that's going to be humming or blowing or things like that? These are things that you just really need to take into consideration. And once you have found the best location, and many people will choose a closet as an example, often an internal space that is surrounded by other rooms, that can sometimes be helpful. Then you want to think about the booth sound. So when you're inside, once you've created that and you're not dealing so much with sounds from outside, then you want to think about how does the booth sound? What's the room sound when I'm in the booth and recording? And when you have your mic, then you can test that out and you may make some adjustments. You may have comforters or waffle foam from old mattresses. It doesn't need to be fancy. It doesn't need to be something that is visually appealing to the general public. Remember, this is your booth, and the main thing is, how does it sound? So you want to adjust your the padding, we'll just call it that, within and around your booth to make sure that you are getting a sound that sounds really nice. Your DAW. This is the nickname for digital audio workstation or workspace, and this refers to your software. And the professional standards, the most typical software for recording, if you ask any professional, they'll most likely say they use Pro Tools. I actually don't use Pro Tools. I use Digital Performer, which is equivalent to Pro Tools, just a different software. But they're fairly expensive, and you don't need to use the more advanced software. The most popular free software for audio recording is Audacity. So I would recommend, if you are in the very beginning of this and trying to figure out what software to use, that you take a look at Audacity. The free version is not overly complex or overly robust, but it will get the job done. Okay, and then of course you're going to need a computer. A laptop is fine. The one thing that you want to make sure is you don't have a whirring sound within your computer that's going to be within your booth as you're recording and then picked up and be underneath all of your audio recording. So I want you just to think about that. It doesn't have to be a super, high-end computer or anything. I always use a laptop. I use a Mac laptop, and that works great. Audio files tend to be on the larger side, but that's, that you don't really have to worry about those issues unless you are trying to do this with a very low-end, low-capacity computer. Audio interface is the box, we'll call it, that goes between your microphone and your computer. It's that interface box. Now, this brings up one issue around microphones, and that is there are USB mics that plug directly into your computer. If you're using one of those, you will not need an audio interface. I personally don't generally advise using a USB computer or microphone, but that is because I don't find the sound as appealing. But technology is always changing, and you may be able to find a mic that has a really great sound with a USB. It's certainly an option. So you may not need the audio interface. You will, however, need a microphone, obviously. And there are many different kinds. I like to use a condenser mic, and I know that that's true for many other voiceover professionals as well. What I do recommend is, if you have a local store, here we have Bananas at Large, which is, close to me. So when I have a microphone question or a technology question in that sound arena, I usually go and talk with somebody there, find out who knows about voiceover work, because it's different from music when you're recording, and explain your needs and what you're trying to accomplish, and they'll give you a range of options that should be fine within your price range, because there are some that are not very expensive and are still quality mics. You also, of course, need a stand. It could be a stand if here's where you want to think about, am I going to sit or am I going to stand? Am I going to have a table or desk in front of me or not? And these are personal decisions, but I personally find that standing, if you can physically, if it's not a hardship or going to create a lot of physical stress for you, that standing is great because it really helps keep your energy up while you're recording. And one of the biggest challenges or biggest problems that I hear in novice recording is that the voice sounds kind of flat and lackluster and, a little more on the boring side. That's the tendency. So anything you can do to, keep it alive, keep it fresh, some of that I find can really be helped by just choosing to stand if you're able. But so that's going to impact this choice that you're going to make regarding your stand. You'll also need what's called a pop filter or a pop shield, and that is, it literally can be a coat hanger wire with a nylon stocking stretched over it, and many professionals use that version. And I used to, and then I got a mic that had a pop filter with it, so I just, use that now. But that is going to help keep your P's from popping too much with that puff of air. There's some other letters as well and consonant combinations that can particularly draw that puff of air. And so your pop filter is helping shield those out or filter those out. And then the shock mount is typically you're going to have a shock mount between your microphone and your stand, and that's going to help reduce any sounds of vibration that are going to come up from the floor through the mic stand and into the recording process. And then, of course, you're going to need cables to go between all those different things. All right. Okay. Oh, it looks like I have cables twice here. Okay. You'll also need headphones. And I want to mention that headphones can actually really dramatically change how your recording sounds. If you listen to your recording through one set of headphones versus another set of headphones versus just through the computer speakers or earbuds, those will change the sound. So I don't want you to worry too much about, I guess the main thing I would suggest is get decent headphones. So don't try and go for the cheapest. And then also get ones that are going to be comfortable for you. All right. Because they can get uncomfortable if you're after wearing them for a few hours. So find something that's not going to drive you crazy and be irritating. Find something that's going to be comfortable and that keeps the sound, that doesn't leak a lot of sound. And then for reading device, you can read from a paper version of your book, but I would discourage that. And that's because controlling page sounds, it's just not worth the trouble. It's not worth the headache that it causes. I have had a few clients who insist upon reading from paper, but it's not, again, it's not the ideal situation. An iPad or a device like that works great. You can scroll without making any sound. It's beautiful. And then you're going to need light in your booth, of course. So think about that. And also, when you choose your light, listen really carefully. Is it humming? Right? These are things that we don't normally have to think about. But when you're adding things like this, like a light, then you want to make sure that you're not adding a hum in. And there are plenty of silent lights that you can use. So just make sure the one you choose is a silent light. You will also need a place to put your computer as you're recording, because you're going to need to use the controls on your keyboard during the course of recording. And then for those who choose not to stand, a chair or a stool, keep in mind, again, how quiet is it? If you wiggle a little bit, are you going to get squeaking or creaking? It's better to have a very quiet chair or stool than to have one that's going to creak if you by chance move. Okay. But you don't have to record at home. You could go to a professional studio. And this is one of those moments where it's so helpful to know what your estimated finished length is, because then you can calculate how much studio time you would need. It will help you set your budget for the project. So what I would recommend is, in terms of the amount of time, this kind of drops down to the question of costs, but look at your estimated finished length and then double that for studio time when you would expect to have to be in the studio, whether it's for corrections or just to do the first recording. And then editing we'll treat separately. So one thing that would be really smart is if you provide a text version of your book that you'll be reading for the technician who's running the computer, and give them instructions, because your average tech, even if you give them the text, if you don't tell them, please stop me if I make a mistake, they won't. They're going to assume you're doing it the way you want to do it. So if you actually would like your book to be as word perfect as possible, then ask them to let you know. Because in the course of reading, it is so easy to inadvertently change up words. Now, if it doesn't matter to you, that's fine. All I'm suggesting is that you give your technician the instructions that you would like. Another instruction you could give, and it would depend on the technician as to how effective this would be. But if you tell them, if you read something and they don't understand what you just read because of the way you phrased it or for whatever reason, if you would like to know, you should let them know that they should stop you at that point, because it might be helpful for you just to reread that sentence in a way that makes more sense. When it comes to editing, most studios will provide that. It's an additional cost. It might be the same as studio time. It might not. And so you would, again, need to give instructions on that. There are some services that do audiobook editing that are very reasonable and considerably lower than your typical studio recording rate. So check around if that's something that you'd like to do. And that is true whether you're recording in a professional studio or whether you're recording at home and would like to job out that piece of the process. When you get to, you'll also need to tell the studio professionals what kind of file you want. And so what you need for your audiobook is you need MP3 files. They need to all be mono or all be stereo. Generally, all mono is the standard, but more and more these days, there are some other there are ones where there's music and sound effects that are mixed in, and you may want to go all stereo. It depends on the project a bit. 192 kbps or higher is a standard required by Audible, and a constant bit rate 44.1 kilohertz. So these are things you can just tell your technician, this is what I need. They'll understand it, and you don't have to figure it out. If you're doing your own post-production, you will have the option when you bounce the file to set those. In terms of how the files are delivered, or in what chunks, you need to have one chapter per file. And each file, so each chapter, cannot be more than 2 hours long or 170 megabytes. So those are your limitations. You need to keep that in mind, because if you go over those, your audiobook will be rejected by Audible, and you don't want that to happen. So you want to make sure that those are happening done right at the front end. You will also need a retail sample, and that is a segment that you choose. It could be the beginning of the book, but it doesn't have to be. And there is no heading to that retail sample. So we wouldn't want to hear chapter 1 and then the pause and then the beginning. You would start after the pause, right? And the standard is fading in and fading out, and 1 to 5 minutes. That's your time segment that you need to have your retail sample fit within, 1 to 5 minutes. You also need to have opening credits and closing credits. And all the information that you need about what goes into those, we may be talking about that later, but it's also available on the acx.com website. So you can take a look there if you're not sure what to put in those. And then costs. Your costs, again, you're going to be able to figure that out because you have already calculated your estimated finished length, which will give you a way to figure out how long it's going to take to record and do your corrections. And then you're also, which I recommend if you're doing professional studio, calculate 2 times your estimated finished length. If you're doing it at home, estimate 10. If you're doing your own editing and everything, estimate 10 times your finished length. Again, this will help you not only in your costs, but also on your scheduling. Okay. There is one other thing before I jump into some of these decisions, and that is, I just want to touch on scheduling a little bit, because it's important as you're figuring out when you're going to record. I just want to encourage you to pick a time of day that's consistent for you, because that's the best way to get your voice to match from one recording session to another. And I may have that a little bit later. Sorry, I'm not remembering at the moment whether I'll bring that up later. But I want to make sure we touch on that because it does impact scheduling. And so if you're going to go with a professional studio in particular, you make sure that that happens. Okay, let's look at the book, the manuscript. Now, for many fiction books, this may seem like, oh, there's nothing particular that I need to think about. I'm just going to start at the beginning and read to the end. But there are decisions to be made that can be very important ones. So, and then in nonfiction books that have some visual elements, then there are more decisions that need to be made and some great opportunities. Let's look at the front matter. Table of contents, we don't ever read those. We just bypass that. Dedication usually is read, but if it is, keep in mind the listener experience. If the dedication, and I'll include here also the acknowledgments at the beginning, if they're entertaining or if they're short, meaningful, and are a good lead in, again, think listener experience. If you jump in to acknowledgments and have a long list of people's names right at the front of your book, you're going to lose your listener before you've even gotten them. So we don't generally put acknowledgments at the beginning of the book if we include them at all. Often we'll include them, but we'll move them to the end of the book, and that is perfectly acceptable. Typically, a dedication is read. Typically, acknowledgments get moved to the back if they're read. But you want to look at what is the front matter of your book and what do you need to include. For back matter, one thing I think is really, really important, even if your print or ebook edition does not include an about the author, make an even better decision here and include one. It's not too late. Your about the author is a way to help your listener be a follower of yours, be a fan, give them something more. They want to know about you. If they've gotten to the end of the book, they want to know more about you. All right? Give them your website. Give them a way that they can come and reconnect with you. Appendices. Sometimes appendices can be really good components of an audiobook. But many times they're either a little too technical or visual. So you really have to look at the content of your appendices. And in particular, I want you to think about what is the listener experience. If you're enhancing the listener experience, go for it. Go ahead and read them. If you are not, use them as an opportunity to provide added value for your listener by offering those on your website. If you have one central place that you can send your listener to learn more about you, to see visual elements from your book, to understand how to connect with you, to find out when your next book is coming out, keep that as one central place. I put here connect with the author because in many versions of books, we see that people have put in, oh, I'm on Twitter here, I'm on Facebook here, etc. Social media is a valuable piece. But what's even more valuable than putting those individual connect points on social media in your book is to have one place that you keep up to date. So let's say Twitter goes away, or you change your handle on Twitter, or whatever it is, whatever changes you make in social media doesn't make that information in your audiobook obsolete. If you just send people to your website, you can keep that up to date and your audiobook does not become obsolete with that information. Bibliographies, again, this is something that you can offer to your listener on your website. I'm very, very big fan of driving people to the author website because that allows the author to provide so much more value and the listener to have a more complete and ongoing relationship with the author and more complete experience. Visual elements that you may have within your book, and this is most typically nonfiction titles, of course, illustrations, photos, graphs, charts, worksheets. So sometimes these are sometimes it's really helpful to describe the information within these components. And this is where preparation of your manuscript is best happening, again, before you actually start the production recording process. Figure out which elements are best described, write up that description, and figure out where it goes in the flow of text. I want to say one other thing about components like these that are within the context of the book where you're sending people to your website. Each time, or not necessarily each time, because you don't want it to be overly frequent. You don't want people to feel like, I'm tired, don't tell me to go to your website anymore. That's not where we want to get to. But carefully placed, along the way in the context of the book, as a way of adding value, you can recommend that or offer to people that if they go to your website, then they can learn more, see these things, do these workshops, download, whatever. Okay? All right, so these are all decisions that you want to make before you start recording. Also, there are things like footnotes, endnotes. Sometimes footnotes can be inserted within the context of the flow. You just alter your voice a little bit to indicate that you're setting that aside, or you might do footnote 1 and then read it and then say end footnote. Likewise, well, let me go back because sometimes footnotes feel more like an interruption. If it's a citation and really a bibliographical reference, then adding those notes in is not adding value to the listener. And I would recommend then eliminating them. But if there are any notes that you feel you would like to have included because they are enhancing that listening experience at any given point, providing valuable information that's going to change the way that they hear this content, then go ahead and insert those. All right. And again, typically you say that you're note or footnote and then end note or end footnote. Similarly, in that regard, with sidebars, if you have material that is set aside in a sidebar, first of all, you want to figure out where in the flow of the text are you going to read it. And then, most often, you do sidebar and then read it, and then end sidebar. But there are other ways to do it. I had a client recently who really didn't want us to do sidebar and end sidebar. And so, because many of those were quotes from people that he had worked with, colleagues, students, we actually used other voices. And you could do the same thing. You can have someone else narrate those pieces if that sounds like it's fitting for your content and would be a benefit. Okay, bonus material versus true to text. So there's a couple different issues here. One is, for example, if you're doing a memoir and you have some updated information or some different anecdotes that are not in the print edition of your book, it's okay to add them. If you feel like it's going to give your listener an even better experience, then I would say go for it. What WhisperSync is a program that Audible set up where they bundle the ebook and the audiobook at a discount, and then you can bookmark, the listener can bookmark where they are in either format, and if they switch formats, the bookmark has moved ahead with them. So it allows you to pick up where you left off in the other format. In order for this program to work and for your text to qualify for it, the book needs to be at least 90% the same as the textbook. And so if that's important to you, that being a part of WhisperSync, if it feels like your book you'd really like that to work for you, then just make sure that your audiobook is pretty close to your textbook in terms of the words. If not, and you feel like, I'd really like to add in this additional material, this is an opportunity to do that. And again, I just wanted to highlight the added value materials on your website. Most books have an opportunity to provide added value on the website, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. The nonfiction items are more easily identified, but fiction items could be, backstory about a character that maybe you're blogging about, that sort of thing. That's also added value. And you can refer to that you don't want to interrupt your story with that as a general rule, but you can certainly do so at the end in your about the author. Okay. All right, let's talk about recording. First things, the preparation. I keep referring to the listening experience, and this is so essential because audiobooks, people choose their audiobooks predominantly because of word of mouth. So somebody tells somebody else, this is a great audiobook, you should listen to it. That's the way most people make their decisions about which audiobooks to listen to. If you're not creating a great listening experience, then your greatest marketing tool is not available to you. So, in fact, if it's not a great listening experience, then often you'll lose a potential follower or fan for good, because people are not very tolerant of poor narration. We don't want to listen to it. There's so many great audiobooks out there. Why use our time with one that's not great? So the point is, make yours great. Just make it great. Do what it takes. And even if it's recording over and over certain segments, whatever it is, make it great. All right. Standing or sitting, I talked about that, about having, using the energy of standing and being able to move. You don't want to be moving around a lot in the booth because you need your mouth close to your pop filter. So your mouth's relationship to the mic should be consistent. But The rest of your body can move. Your hands can move. The idea is keeping it alive, keeping it really vibrant, and staying present for your listeners. Even though they're not in the room with you at the moment, it will, their listening experience is that you're talking to them. So you need to remember them while you're recording. One thing that's very, very helpful is articulation warm-ups. And that's easy enough. You can do anything from reading your own text, slowly at first and picking up the pace, or you can do any number of articulation warm-ups, and you can look them up online or make up your own. It doesn't matter. The idea is get your mouth and those muscles ready to go. And one thing I can't stress it enough, and that needs some more exclamation points there, and that is hydrate yourself. It is so important, not only for your own stamina, but also because our mouths start to make more and more little clicky, annoying sounds the less hydrated we are. So the more you can hydrate, the better off you're going to be, the better your sound is going to be. So that's a big, big issue. And don't just hydrate on the day that you're in the booth. Do it days before. Really hydrate yourself before you even start recording, because it takes a while for your cells to really be ready, hydrated, fully hydrated. Oh, and then, okay, this is what I mentioned earlier, record at the same time of day. So if you're an afternoon recorder, just record in the afternoon. Be consistent, and that will help your recording be consistent for many reasons. But that is a very important piece. Okay. One other thing I will say that what I did not put on that last slide, and that is about what to wear in the booth. What I would suggest is wear knits, wear quiet clothes, right? What you can do is whatever you decide to wear, then just stand and move around a little bit and make sure you don't hear your clothes swishing. If you do, change into something else. All right, you'll just make your life easier and your recording better if you do that. Okay, let's move into the booth. First of all, recording an audiobook, it's not just reading your text. It's so much more than that. You are really acting. Whether it's fiction or nonfiction, it doesn't matter. The idea is you're bringing this story to life for your listeners. And so I want you to treat it with that level of passion, that excitement. When you have a fiction book and you're doing character dialogue, having a consistent voice for each different character is very helpful and important for your listeners so they don't get confused. It drives people crazy when they, I know it drives me crazy if I'm listening to an audiobook and I can't keep track of who's talking because either the character voice is inconsistent or there's not enough differentiation between one character and another character. And then you get confused, and then it pulls you out of the story. One thing you can do to help you with your consistency is to write down some different characteristics or even the way that you choose to produce that particular kind of sound. So if you want to do a voice that maybe is like this, or if you want to do a voice that sounds a little maybe more like a guy, or someone who's just got a sort of a side voice. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. You choose. But the idea is write down some of those characteristics that you're doing and maybe even record a few words for each voice so that you can go back and remind yourself what that voice sounds like. And then this is important for both fiction and nonfiction, and that is creating understanding through emphasis and phrasing. This can be a trap for authors recording their own audiobooks because you already know what you wanted to say. But unless you phrase it in such a way that you're creating that oral sense for your listener, there is a great risk that you will leave them confused, trying to figure out what you mean. And this is not helpful. That pulls them out of the story, out of the experience, and gives them, puts them into a struggle place. So we don't want to do that. Think about the fact that you need to create that understanding for them. Your words alone will not do it. This is where that performance of the words, it becomes so important. And just keeping it alive, keeping it fresh. One thing that can help is taking breaks frequently, and they can be short breaks. Take a 5-minute, take a 10-minute, whatever you need to really just keep it alive, keep it fresh. Think about the fact that this is the first time that person has heard the story, right? And think of them like they're on the edges of their seats. They're eager to hear the story, and you should be as eager to share it. Okay? Quotes and footnotes. So these are moments where when we're doing a quote, it's similar to doing dialogue in some ways, in that you're altering your voice just a little bit. So creating a kind of set aside. So the idea here is really, it's like creating oral punctuation. And it's just about changing the way that you say something just a little bit so that people can understand that it's set aside in a different kind of way. Okay, so for example, with a quote, you can say quote and end quote. That's one way to handle it. Or you could just say it in a slightly different voice and then come back to your regular voice. With footnotes, you can stop. If you say note, then that will help the listener to understand where you are and not get confused. And then with the end note. But you can also just sort of maybe subdue your voice just a little bit. That can also help us get the sense of it. And speak to your listener. Don't think about that you're performing to the mic. You're not. You're performing to the person or people who are listening. You're talking to one person at a time, one listener at a time. But think about, who is your ideal listener? Who's your target market? Is it a 10-year-old? Is it someone who's just retired? Is it a woman who's in the middle of her management career? Who is your ideal listener? Speak to that person the way you would if you were right next to them. That will help. And in the process of recording, if you stumble, just start the sentence over again and just give it, all you need is just the tiniest bit of a moment, just so that you're not immediately running right into, if I stumble and then I go, oh, I stumbled, now I'm going to keep going. No. If I stumble, you see, just give yourself a moment, because that's going to make the editing process so much easier. And don't worry about having to stop and go back and record over. All of that can take place in your editing process. And then you just snip out the part where the stumble was. All right, moving into post-production. Again, this is where we do things like we're snipping out the parts where you stumbled, where there was, maybe you initially mispronounced a word and then you fixed it. Or you're going through and you're listening, and this is also frequently the point at which you realize that there is a problem. You said the wrong word, or any number of things could happen. There was a dog that barked that you hadn't heard when you were in the booth, and you need to edit out that sound. Things like that. These extraneous sounds, the sound of a dog barking, or a leaf blower that went off that you didn't hear in the moment, but now you hear it as you're going back and listening to it. The clicky little mouth sounds that can happen. Bumping the mic that maybe you didn't realize it made a sound when you bumped it. All of these things you're going to be taking care of during post-production, during editing. And what you're going to be doing after you do that editing process is you're going to do what we call pickups. So that's where you're going to correct the problems if you need to record over. So pickups are when you're going to re-record a brief section. One of the things that's important about the pickups is trying to match your voice. And it may take many different times of trying, all in a row usually, of trying to make it so your voice matches what it was right before and after. And you literally, with your software, you'll be able to jump in to where you messed up and stop at the end of your re-record. Then you want to play back and listen to make sure that it sounds like it's all happened in the same recording. You can adjust your spacing and stuff, that's all fine, but you want to try and get your voice to match as much as possible. Some of the things that are required by the audiobook distributors are things that have to do with spacing. So for example, the heads, the very beginning, before we hear any sound at all, we need a half a second to a second. Tails, that's at the very end, at the end of a chapter, last word, last sound, and then we need 1 to 5 seconds. And then gaps, like after the name of the chapter and before the beginning of the chapter text, we need a gap. Before and after subheadings, bullet points, things like that. I suggest trying to find a consistent timing and sticking with that throughout. This is, again, most often in nonfiction that you're going to be dealing with a lot of that. And what these gaps are, they're not absolute silence. They're actually room tone, which means it's recorded silence, recorded in the same space where you were recording so that it all sounds consistent. Music. Some people like to mix in music, tops of chapters, at the head of a chapter, or credits. Some people like to do at the ends of chapters. I don't like that so much as a listener because it feels distracting to me. But if you decide that you're going to mix in music, just to remember, this is probably the most important piece, is to remember that all mono or all stereo files when you're bouncing those files. And then the other thing is just making sure that your volume mix is good, so you're not drowning yourself out with music. Bullet points. This is, again, where, just trying to be consistent on gaps can be really helpful. Even if it's, we're talking about parts of a second, the experience of listening to it, if your gaps are really consistent, it really has that feel of kind of that bullet point feel, or that feel of structure. And then for a lot of this information regarding heads and tails and that sort of thing is all available on acx.com, where they have their submission requirements. We use their submission requirements because they are the most strict. And so if you just abide by theirs, then all the rest of the distributors will be happy. And then we're up to the launch. This is that big, exciting moment. What happens now? I recommend going with 2 different distributors and actually creating an account for each. So go to acx.com, set up a free author account there, and choose non-exclusive. And then you'll upload all of your information there. Then go to authorsrepublic.com, set up a free account, and do the same thing for them. Now you're going to have an option there. It's going to ask if you want them to distribute to Audible and iTunes. And if you follow this advice, then you would say no. You just want them to distribute to everyone else. Okay. Authors Republic is always non-exclusive, and ACX wants you to be exclusive and is trying to tempt you with a 40% royalty rate, but you miss out on a lot of distribution through, for example, libraries and Barnes and Noble and some other key places around the world. And besides, I think as a general rule, it's best to not do exclusive deals, especially with Amazon. They're already so powerful and so dominant, and unfortunately so greedy as well. Okay, and then the royalties, the non-exclusive royalty rates for ACX are 25%, and for Authors Republic, which covers many different distributors, and they average about 35% on royalties. That's of the suggested retail. With Authors Republic, you do get to suggest your own retail price. And I know we're just about to run out of time here, so I want to try and wrap this up quickly. When you go to upload your information, these are the things that you're going to need. And I will just mention, so your cover image, you definitely need. Authors Republic will give you an optional rectangular. Some of their distributors prefer that, so I suggest that you do that. Your metadata, you want to think about what keywords you're using, what your book description is. Your BISAC codes are so important. Choose those well. And the one other thing that is sometimes a question, and that's with ISBNs and the ASIN. With ACX, they're not going to ask you for an ISBN. You don't have the option of adding one. With Authors Republic, you do have the option. Now, they'll offer you free ones if you prefer. And just keep in mind that that means that they control the metadata for your book and that it will show up with them as the publisher. If you're publishing multiple books, multiple formats of your book, we always recommend that you get your own ISBNs. Okay. And then what? Now the next part is you don't just launch and forget it. Launch and then market. So you've got 3 days to 3 weeks initially before the audiobook is going to go live in the distributor. Before it goes live in the distribution channels. And typically 3 days is audiobooks.com. 2 to 3 weeks is audible.com. And some of the others actually do take longer, but these are the main channels, the biggest channels where it's going to come up. Audible will offer you 25 free download codes for your book, and you have to request them. So go ahead and do that, and then use those to get yourself some reviews. Reach out to people, share those, but use them wisely. And then, social media. There's so much that can happen in marketing. We don't have a lot of time to cover this. I try to offer as much information about this as I can on my website as well. The main thing is be persistent. Don't give up. This is your baby, and now it's born. Go forth and help it to learn to walk and run and really thrive. So what we covered, we talked about preparation, the studio, your book and preparation of the manuscript, the recording process itself, what to do after it's recorded, post-production, and then the launch. So if you need help, I'm here. ProAudioVoices.com is my website. I try to have a lot of information for you there. And then AuthorToolkits.com, we have an audiobook, do-it-yourself audiobook, basically your toolkit, your comprehensive guide for recording your own audiobook. It has the information that we've covered and a lot more. So thank you so much for being here and for participating in this. And I look forward to hearing from you or to seeing your audiobook in the channels.